Dr. Pastor, there's this common argument. I hear it even in Black circles, definitely hear it in Maga rights circles, and that is this notion that undocumented workers take away jobs from American citizens. Now, there's been a lot of reports out that debunk that proposition, that statement, but help us understand what the data actually says about the impact that undocumented workers have on job availabilities for non, undocumented workers, for U.S. citizens, white folks, black folks. What does the data say about any impact that undocumented workers have on their abilities to get jobs?
Well, Reva, I love it that you're interested in data because, as you know from DC, that is not the call to actually focus in on facts. So, the easiest way to think about it, then I'll explain it a little more technically, is that when you've got an agricultural worker, and about half of the ag workers in California are undocumented, the frontline ag workers, the pickers, etc. You're creating jobs for truckers, for grocery store clerks, for executives at companies selling food. Another way to think about it, behind every software engineer is an army of nannies, food service workers, gardeners, a lot of them who may lack legal status in the country. Now, what economists understand, I am one, is that generally immigrants help generate economic growth. But there's both competitive and complementary effects. Competitive means people are in the same job. Maybe there's an undocumented immigrant worker there. There's some competition. Complementary means that because that worker's there, other jobs are being generated. The interesting thing is that who undocumented workers compete with the most are current legal immigrant workers because they're in exactly the same sectors of the economy. The people who benefit the most are whites who tend to be in sectors that are actually propped up by these immigrant workers and the jobs that they help create. The group that's in the middle that is sometimes helped, sometimes hurt, are Black workers. What's interesting about that is that if you look at the polling data, white folks are the most opposed to immigration. Uh, Immigrants are the most favorable. Black folks are somewhere in the middle, which I've always said suggests that Black people are the only rational political actors in the United States because they actually get this issue right, that there's both some competitive effects and some complementary effects. What I think has been
So,
interesting, though, is just that a lot of Black leaders have understood that the terror that's being unleashed on immigrants in the United States right now is racialized. And it's not separate from the fear that struck into the heart of Black communities by the Trump regime as well. And so we've seen a lot of that kind of solidarity because of the way that politics can play out to mutual benefit.
when I think about Black workers, and as you said, Black folks are in the middle, that they do see some competition from undocumented workers. Here in a place like California, I think about undocumented workers in the agriculture industry. I don't know a single solitary Black person that works on any of those strawberry farms, any of those other farms that are in the middle of the country, picking strawberries, picking fruit. So where do you see most of the competition between undocumented workers and Black workers? Is it in like factories, auto factories, where you may see a heavy concentration of Black workers? What industries are you likely to see that competition?
Well, first, some places in the South, we've seen some competition as well as complementarity. For example, in poultry and different kinds of processing, where there's been some back and forth, but a lot of those Black and often Latino workers have come together because given the racism of the South, there's a common enemy there. The racialized white supremacist regimes that they're trying to resist at a state level. But for example, in Los Angeles County 40 years ago, most of the janitors were Black. Now, almost all of those janitors are immigrant Latinos. So that's a place where there has been succession and competition. But you don't address that by fighting with one another. You address that by figuring out how you can come together. And fortunately, unions have tried to do that work.
It's interesting too, Professor, that you said that whites are propped up by the immigrant population. So if white people, these executives that you said, are able to work 12, 14-hour days in their tech firms or their law firms or, big accounting and banking organizations because they have Latino and undocumented workers in some case, holding down their homes as nannies, as chefs, as drivers, if they know that, why do we see this kind of, universal in some parts of the country outcry by whites against undocumented workers, knowing that if undocumented workers were all somehow magically deported from this country, they would be left without an infrastructure to even run their businesses and even their homes?
Could it be racism, Areva? I think it's really fear. I mean, people say that they're scared of immigrants. I think they're scared of their children. The fact that they're being born in America, the fact that they want to become part of America, that the nation is changing, that the nation will become majority people of color by the year 2045. And it's that demographic future that's actually really fearful. I think what we're seeing is a sort of MAGA politics of division, of polarization, of separation, of not seeing that our destinies are interwoven. And it's when we can make the arguments around mutuality, when we can see ourselves in the other, when we can build the bridges and not the walls, that we begin to build a better and more successful country. The jobs in the Midwest, they didn't flee because of undocumented workers going there. Springfield, Illinois, perfect example. Those are not undocumented workers that moved there. Those are Haitians that had legal rights to work in the United States, but they helped to prop up a set of industries that are benefiting white incumbent residents in Springfield, Illinois. And what the president and the vice president, current vice president, did during the campaign was to demonize those Haitian immigrants, to accuse them of eating cats and dogs, to strike fear in people's hearts, rather than to say, how do we understand that these new entrants are propping up our economy in ways that benefit incumbent residents, that lift their property values? Because instead of having a dying town, they had a thriving town. So we've got a politics of division. How do we create a politics of mutuality that's based on our human connections? And frankly, that's based on data and not hysteria.